Tom is at the AFCIA Homeland Security Conference all this morning. Earlier, he spoke with retired Coast Guard Vice Admiral Harvey Johnson. Now he's turning to an expert familiar with Coast Guard navigation systems and executing critical missions. Dana Goward is president and executive director of the Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation, also former Maritime Navigation Authority and director of Maritime Domain Awareness, both from the Coast Guard. And he and Tom are at AFCIA now. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Emily and Mr. Goward. Great to have you on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
All right. So there is positioning, there's awareness in everything you're doing now. So let's talk about GPS because you hear it a lot. We all use it in our daily lives. It's changing air navigation someday, we hope, profoundly. What about things that are not in the air?
Yes, indeed. Well, not only is GPS important for aviation and, in fact, all forms of transportation, but it's essential to nearly every aspect of modern American life. Financial transactions, cell phones, the Internet, even agriculture, all depends upon the GPS signal. And without it, we'd be in tough straits. It's become kind of like a silent utility. It's like water. We can do without it for short periods of time, but even then it's fairly unpleasant, and an extended outage could be disastrous.
I used it this morning to find coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning on my way in here.
Yes, indeed. So all kinds of critical applications just like that.
Now, I guess for the Coast Guard and maybe for the Navy, too, they have been using it in daily operations probably longer than the aircraft industry or air flying industry.
Well, it's certainly been widely used in maritime, and it's essential to a wide variety of maritime systems. The automatic identification system, for example, which is the transponders essentially for that let you know where all the vessels are, is dependent upon GPS so that the transponders know where they are. But it goes even further. Even down into the engine controls of some vessels are dependent upon the GPS signal. And in fact, it's great. There's a great concern across both the maritime and other enterprises that GPS is such a faraway, faint signal and very easy to disrupt. Because so many systems are dependent upon it when it is disrupted, and it's disrupted fairly frequently on a localized basis. There are so many alarms that go off that it's difficult to tell what's going wrong. There was a trial that was done on a ship in the English Channel. Even the compass and the radar alarmed when GPS was disrupted because it's been integrated into so many systems and supposedly backup systems for GPS. So that's why we founded the Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation. We were looking to support better laws and better enforcement to combat jamming and spoofing of the GPS signals. And we're also supporting a high-power terrestrial, very difficult to disrupt system that can be paired with GPS so that the two of them are almost impossible to disrupt, and that critical infrastructure will have two signals that they can use, and so our critical infrastructure won't be so dependent upon this thin, fragile line from space that pretty much anyone with a handheld device can disrupt at will.
Interesting. So a lot of questions that raises. Let's talk about that second signal, because didn't recently the federal government retire something like a 60 or 75-year-old ground-based, I guess it was a radar type of system that has been used for decades and decades for navigation. They shut them down, right?
Exactly. That was called the RNT system.
Yeah.
In fact, it was an antiquated system that was shut down in 2010. It was appropriate to do so. Now, DHS had previously committed to transforming that antiquated system, the RNT, into something called eLORAN, which was much more accurate, much less expensive, much easier to maintain. And the reason they were going to do that is to have it as this terrestrial complement for GPS, so that both signals could be used by critical infrastructure, and we wouldn't have this huge vulnerability. For one reason or another, that DHS was never able to execute on that plan. Unfortunately, at the same time, a lot of our adversaries and competitors around the world have gone ahead and done that. Iran has established a terrestrial high-power system that they don't say what it is, but it sounds very much like eLORAN. Russia has a system that they're upgrading. China has a system. South Korea, India are building systems. Saudi Arabia has a system. Northwestern Europe has a system that's led by the United Kingdom, an eLORAN system, again, so that they have guaranteed position, navigation, and timing if in fact GPS is disrupted by any one of a number of things that could possibly happen.
And ELRAN comes from, is it radar based? I mean, where does it get
well,
its information?
it's land based. It comes from towers. It's a very, very high power, low frequency signal. It's incredibly difficult to disrupt. It's the average received signal is about 1.3 million times stronger
but
than the GPS signal.
But it doesn't depend on GPS itself.
It doesn't. It syncs with GPS when it's available, so they both give exactly the same information, but it can operate independently. So one of the things that we've offered to the federal government from the foundation, since the federal government seems to be in stalemate on this issue, is we've offered to engage them in a cooperative agreement or some other kind of partnership to help them get over the stalemate and to build the system. We think that if the federal government doesn't want to pay for it, if they just contribute the infrastructure, we can make it into a self-sustaining business by selling value-added services, but while at the same time providing greatly increased critical infrastructure security for the nation.
We're speaking with Dana Goward. He's president and executive director of the Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation. And getting away from ELRAN for a moment, what can be done in the foundation's view, in your view, to make the GPS signal more reliable, and maybe, I guess it can't be any stronger unless you have more satellites?
Well, yes, you'll always have a problem with satellite systems because they necessarily have a very weak signal. And there are things that are being done with receivers and with antennas to make them less susceptible to spoofing and to jamming. But you'll always have that very faint signal problem. So one of the other things that we advocate is stronger laws and better enforcement for anti-jamming and spoofing. Right now, it's not illegal to own a jammer, and you can put it in your cigarette lighter in your car and drive along, and has happened. You can disrupt the landing systems at an airport that you're passing by. Using a jammer is illegal, but it's only a civil offense. Now, in Australia, you can go to jail for doing something like that, and we think that's appropriate because you could kill people, do lots of economic damage by disrupting the GPS signal.
And you mentioned that Iran and China and some other countries have the ELRAN.
They do.
Are they also jamming GPS? Do they have that capability?
Well, so many militaries do have the capability to jam GPS. In fact, North Korea demonstrated this on almost a yearly basis just to vex their neighbors to the south. They'll just jam GPS for some period of time and disrupt all kinds of aircraft, ships, and cellular telephone traffic. So the Russian military, for example, as a matter of doctrine, that because signals from space are so faint, they won't be available when they go into combat. So they plan on bringing their navigation, their terrestrial navigation, with them, and they've developed a portable system called Scorpion, as a matter of fact. So the U.S. military is very concerned about this and is struggling with it right now.
Now, we've talked about military and maritime Coast Guard awareness and the ability to navigate in time. But really the GPS and the timing and the positioning is of concern to practically every federal agency. Has some GPS component to what it does.
Every federal agency, every American citizen should be very, very concerned about this because everything we do in America, just about, depends on some form of the GPS signal. So if you move more than 100 feet from your house, if you have anything delivered, if you ever use the internet, an ATM, a cell phone, you're going to need to be concerned that we're depending upon one very fragile and weak signal from space, and we don't have a secondary reliable capability that they can move indoors, underground, and underwater like these other systems the other nations have.
And what do we know about the satellites themselves, their age, their life cycle? Are there plans to launch replacement ones because no satellite lasts forever?
Absolutely, and I have to say, give the U.S. Air Force props because they've done an absolutely outstanding job of creating, maintaining, and refreshing the GPS constellation, and it is as good as it can be. It is world-class, bar none. But at the same time, nothing is perfect. Did you see the movie Gravity?
Yes.
Yeah, so just one example.
Hope that doesn't happen.
Exactly right. Space debris sweeps through and all kinds of things go. Solar flare. I mean, just because they're way far away from us doesn't mean they're immune to any number of different challenges.
Dana Goward is president of the Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation. He's also former director of Maritime Domain Awareness Program Integration at the Coast Guard. Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
And reporting live from the AFCIA Homeland Security Conference, Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM.